guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled, "A Neighbor Gets Kicked Out of the Neighborhood." 1 year ago, I was renting a house next to the most unpleasant neighbor I hope to ever experience. The only thing I liked about her was her cat, this freakishly adorable tabby who could grab even the most hardened criminal's heart by the balls. Every time I came home from work, he would sidle up next to me for some TLC, which he never got from my neighbor. As far as I could tell, she just used the poor thing to keep away mice and play i.e., be terrorized by her toddler grandkids on the weekends. The poor fur baby looked severely underfed and always appreciated the meals I'd leave out for him on our back porch. I have an indoor fur baby of my own, a tailless ball of energy, aptly named Goblin, and one day he managed to escape outside. Luckily, I found him within a few hours, but by the next morning, what jumps on my lap? Not Goblin, alas, but a flea. And if my social butterfly cat had fleas, I was positive the next door fur baby had fleas too. Now, I already had a bitter history with this neighbor. In addition to being a twat rocket to her cat, she'd harassed my older parents when they were helping me move in. Why? Because our U-Haul rental was blocking a dead-end sidewalk in front of my house. My parents are very kind people. My mom has literally been thanked on customer service hotlines for being so sweet. And this lady was berating them needlessly for ruining the community, ranting even longer than they'd been parked, until they eventually moved to an inconvenient and wholly unnecessary distance. Regardless of her twat rocket personality, I figured I'd warn her anyway in the best interests of her fur baby. When I knew she was at home the next day, I knocked on her front door. When she answered, no hello, just a scowl, I started to explain that my escaped indoor cat has fleas and so there was a good possibility that her outdoor cat also had fleas. Immediately she berates me for letting my cat get fleas and snaps that she keeps her house very clean, unlike me, so there is no way her cat has fleas. I just loudly sighed at her and went back home as she continued to yell. You've never even been in my house, lady. And that's not how fleas work. All week I noticed her cat scratching himself raw and felt so bad for the little guy. I wanted to give him flea medication and a flea bath, but with my neighbor now watching me like a hawk and screeching like a banshee if I even pet him anymore, I had to leave him alone. But, I realized, there was something I could do. You see, we shared the same landlord, who was very concerned about household pests and instructed us to call him at the first sight of a bedbug, tick, etc. I also knew that my neighbor was keeping her cat a secret from the landlord to avoid paying the pet rent, as I'd overheard her bragging about this to a friend outside one day. So, what do? I call up the landlord to explain the flea situation, and I make sure to add that my neighbor's cat has also been scratching like crazy. There's a pause. Did you say she has a cat? Yes, I assure him, she definitely has an indoor-outdoor cat. Turns out that my neighbor had harassed our landlord into replacing most of her carpet due to her alleged cat allergy. I don't know why the landlord caved into this, but it wasn't cheap. And now our landlord learned that not only had Madwoman lied about an allergy to score a free renovation, but she hadn't paid pet rent in more than a year. Well, an exterminator gets called, and our landlord himself shows up to oversee the whole thing. We had both received a flyer taped to our front doors giving notice that he would be coming to our houses on that date, but I may or may not have removed my neighbor so she wouldn't be able to just hide evidence of her cat for a few hours. So, our landlord arrives, and I listen gleefully with my window open as my neighbor tries to prevent him and the exterminator from entering. Eventually she allows them to come inside, where there is obvious evidence of a pet living there. I don't know exactly what transpired between her and the landlord, there must be other shit stains on her record, being such a nutcase, but a few months later I had a new next-door neighbor. And guess who Madwoman purposely abandoned during the move? Her poor fur baby, who became a much-loved, and flea-free, member of our house. The next story is titled, Would I be the a-hole for planting prickly bushes in my front yard to keep the neighbor's kids from my property? I moved into a detached townhouse a few months ago. It's a rental, I'm leasing it for a year with the option to extend that with a second year or possibly buy the house. My driveway is right next to the neighbor's. It's big enough to fit 2 regular-sized cars, and halfway down my driveway there's a path leading around my house. On one side of the path is my house and on the other side is about 3 meters of yard, that's mine. Ever since I moved in, I've been having issues with the neighbor using my driveway for parking, turning their cars, storing their other stuff, playing etc. Asking them to stop using it and keep their items on their own property has not worked, so I placed a few large plants, installed a camera and a no trespassing sign, and that helped a bit. At least the cars are gone. The last few weeks with the stay-home advice, I've been working from home, but the neighbors' kids are making that really hard. They're about 5 and 7, boys, and they keep ringing my doorbell multiple times a day to ask if they can play with my dog, if I want to play with them or anything else they can think of. I asked them to stop it so I can work, which of course didn't work, so I asked their parents, and was told boys will be boys and they weren't going to do anything about it. To keep my sanity intact, I removed the battery from the doorbell, but now they keep running around in my front yard, on the path around the house, banging on my windows, banging on my doors, and actually tried to open the gate to my backyard this morning as they heard me in there. I once again asked them to stop, told them I will not be allowing them to play with the dog anymore at all if they keep this up, and they left, sending over their dad. I told him to keep the boys away from my property and door, if not, I'll be planting some prickly bushes to teach them to stay away from other people's property and shut the door in his face. Would I be the a-hole if I actually did that? I'd love to place a fence or something, but as it may be a short-term rental, I have to be able to return everything in its original state for now. Edit. I'm getting a lot of comments about social distancing and lack of isolation of the boys. I'm from the EU, my country isn't on lockdown and it's, or was, I'm not 100% sure anymore, advised to let small children play outside. Update. About a week after my post, I planted a wall of blackberries and raspberries at the 2 sides of my garden facing the driveway, about 30 centimeters from the edge so no overhanging branches. On the other side of the berry wall, I planted lots of stuff like strawberries and tomatoes. To reach the tomatoes and strawberries from the driveway you have either go through the fruit bushes or walk up to my house, walk about 2 meters along the side of the house and my windows and then walk into my actual garden. Not something you do by mistake. For about 2 weeks it was somewhat quiet, but I still found the kids on my driveway every single day. As far as I know they did not enter the garden and I hadn't noticed them walking around my house anymore, so I figured the bushes were working. About 1 week ago berry season started, and my bushes are now full of raspberries and there's lots of strawberries as well. The neighbors noticed. First, I caught the boys picking and eating raspberries, so I told them off and dropped them off at home, told their mom I caught them stealing. That's how I see it even though it's fruit, and that I'd call the cops next time. She huffed and told me to grow up but took the boys inside anyway. After that it was quiet up until yesterday afternoon, when I went out for a while and found the dad and his 2 sons right in the middle of my garden when I returned, clearing my bushes and plants. I didn't even confront them, just called the cops from a distance as they hadn't noticed me yet and started filming them after making the call. Luckily 2 cops showed up after 10 minutes or so and they confronted the neighbor as they were still picking berries. They told them they were trespassing and that the berry picking was in fact considered stealing and that I could press charges. For the first time I noticed a bit of fear in my neighbor's eyes. He was having trouble finding his words and kept looking back at his house, I guess hoping his wife would show to yell at the cops. They all went inside with the cops, so I just went home as well. After a while the cops came by and asked me if I wanted to press charges. I asked them if they felt like they scared the neighbor enough to stay away. I got a small smile and yes about him, but the wife had just kept shouting at them and her husband about the little witch living next door. I told them no for now, asked them if I'd be allowed to get an extra camera set up on the wall between my garden and the road to cover the entire front garden plus driveway. They said that's allowed as long as it's on my side of the wall. So, now I'm getting an extra camera installed. One neighbor knows I'm done messing around, but his wife isn't there yet, and if I ever catch any of them again, the cops will be called, and possible charges will follow. The next story is titled, "He Pesters Neighbor to Cook for Him for $5. I'm a 31-year-old single guy who lives alone in an apartment complex. I've lived there for 6 years. My neighbor across the hall, a woman around my age or a little younger, I actually don't know her first name, but I'll call her Katie, lives across the hall from me diagonally and has for about 2 years. We exchange hellos but aren't friendly, which is how it is with most of my neighbors. So, I don't know how to cook, and due to losing one of my part-time gigs, I don't have as much money for takeout anymore. I'm getting really sick of eating cheap fast food or box mac and cheese. I'm gaining weight and I never feel great. This is where Katie comes in. I can always smell her cooking in the hall, and it always smells amazing. I know it isn't the other person at our end of our hall cause it's a single old man. I've even complimented it a few times. So, I got the idea that I'd offer to give her some money each week to cook a little extra and bring it over to me, or I can pick it up from her at night. She's cooking anyway, and then I'd have varied presumably delicious food. I asked her the next time I saw her, and she looked surprised and said she couldn't because she was too busy, which didn't make sense because she cooks almost every day, but okay. The next time I saw her a few days later, I asked her if she was sure and upped the amount I was offering, and she said she was sure and that it was rude to ask me, and that she isn't a housekeeper for hire, and I should get a housekeeper if that's what I want. She also called me a stranger even though we have talked in the halls before. Overall, she made me feel like a big jerk and really embarrassed for even asking her, and a little mad because she was acting like I was being creepy. I wasn't, trust me, she isn't my type. I think asking her to split cooking wasn't completely outlandish, since she cooks every day anyway and it wouldn't be hard to make a little more. So, am I the a-hole? Edit. Okay. It is abundantly clear that I was the a-hole and asking her was inappropriate and, as much as I hate to admit it, creepy. My instinct is to apologize to her, but since my instinct was to ask her in the first place, I'll do the opposite and stay out of her hair. Update. I knew when I saw this thread with my real account that I would be mentioned. That thread was a real wake-up call for me about what a weirdo I was being. I ended up apologizing to my neighbor, whose name I now know, and telling her I didn't realize how inappropriate my question was. She accepted the apology, and we still nod and smile in the hallway when we see each other. I will say that I talked to my old man neighbor yesterday and he told me that she left him a tray of fudge over the weekend for the holidays. I received no such fudge, so I know there is lingering weirdness from my ask and I totally understand it and do not feel that I deserve fudge. So, thanks again for everyone for pointing out how weird and entitled I was acting. It did help, even the mean comments, because seeing the strong reactions people had to what I did made me realize there was no wiggle room for me to not be an a-hole. The last story is titled, Man Loses His Wedding Ring in 7 Inches of Snow. This happened late yesterday afternoon, and I'm still trying to deal with the aftermath. Since Sept of 2013, I've lost about 30 pounds, which has been really great, but it came back to bite me yesterday. It bit hard. After my wife was done with work yesterday afternoon, she thought it would be a good idea for our 2 boys to play in the 6 or 7 inches of snow that had fallen overnight. So, we bundled up the kiddos, grabbed the saucer and went out in our backyard to slide down the little hill. Since the kids are 1 and 3, this little grade is perfect for them to sled down. Being dad, I had to take a few runs myself, just to see what it was like. It was good, but it could be a bit longer, so I decided to go down a different way and make a new path. I ran. I jumped on the saucer. I went down the hill and fell off, getting powder all over me, in my boots, up my pants, and in my gloves. Quickly I pulled my glove off of my left hand and shook the snow off. That's when I felt it go. It felt like eternity, but there was nothing I could do in that split second. My white gold wedding band went flying off my finger and landed somewhere in the snow. After losing the weight, my ring has been really loose enough to come off while shaking my hand. I have no idea where it is. My attempts at raking the snow were futile last night. My finger feels weird without it, and my wife thinks I'm a complete nimrod. Update. Before I give you all the update, I want to say a few things. First, thanks to the individual who thought losing gold deserves some gold. I appreciate the sentiment. Second, I can't believe my misfortune made it to the front page. I thought it was cool. My non-Redditor wife wasn't impressed when I showed her. Win some, lose some. Thirdly, I was very disappointed in the comments that mocked, or made fun of the fact that 30 pounds over 27 months. For some of us, it's a big accomplishment. Clearly, those commenters don't have any idea how hard it can be. It was not a shock that my ring was loose, and it was not an overnight thing, but the snow incident was the first time it had come off my hand with no help. Now to the main event you've all been waiting for. The wife and I brought the boys to the store to buy a metal detector. I was going at the suggestion of some, and myself, to buy it, find the ring and return it. When my Minnesota nice, uber honest wife found out what my plan was, she shot down the idea. Especially since she was afraid that if they wouldn't take it back, we'd be out $160. So, it was off to plan B, the rental shop. $60 for a weekly rental sounded much better to the wife. I didn't really care, I just wanted to find my ring. It was 2 days before we could get to the rental place. 2 agonizing days. I saw animal tracks running right through the area where I thought I lost it on the first day. The next day, my next-door neighbor ran his snowmobile through his backyard, running right against the fence, near where it could have flown off nearby. Finally picked up the detector and quickly got to work. After about 45 minutes of false positives and frustration from the dog running around where I was looking and my 3-year-old digging through piles of snow that I was scanning, I was about to give in to the fading daylight. I found one more spot that I was sure would be a false positive, like every other hit near the chain-link fence. I decided to dig since the snow wasn't packed down. That's when I saw something. I dug about 3 inches into the snow and pulled out my ring, completely ice-encrusted. Held it tight in my hand, looked up at the living room window to see my wife looking down, and thrust my hand toward the sky and gave a few fist pumps. I was stoked. Turns out, I really am a Nimrod. Thanks for listening.